Good evening and welcome to A Slice of Life. I'm your host, Jim Therian. Tonight's subject is something called the Gateway Commission. Now, if you've never heard of the Gateway Commission, welcome to the club. I have a guest here from the Gateway Commission, and she's going to tell us all about the Gateway Commission. Her name is Judy Preston. Judy, welcome to A Slice of Life. Could you please tell us about the Gateway Commission?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me, and on behalf of the Gateway Commission. Yes, my name is Judy Preston, and I have been a member for only a couple of years, the most current time that I've been on the commission. I was on it a number of years ago for 5 years or so.
Yep.
So this is my second signing up on it.
It's probably a good thing you came back.
Well, it's an interesting, and actually it's an entirely different commission now than it was when I was on it before.
Okay.
They change.
Okay. So, how did the Gateway Commission get started?
Interesting story, and I agree with you that there's a reason why not many people know about the Gateway Commission. It hasn't been hugely visible, and the Commission's working on that right now. But part of what makes it so interesting is that it has a history that is specific to the estuary of the Connecticut River, and it started in the late 60s as a proposal for a national recreation area to be put along the entire length of the Connecticut River, so all the way up to Quebec, Canada, down to what was called on the paperwork, what was proposed to be called the Gateway. So there was the Gateway, there was a middle area, and then there was the upper region.
Right.
All were going to be focusing on different parts of what makes that river so beautiful.
Right.
And it was a hot topic for a number of years. It took 8 years of a lot of people going to lots of meetings, and eventually it was resoundingly rejected.
Now that's surprising, because the late 60s, early 70s, that was right at when the Earth Day got started. You'd think it would have been accepted back then.
Well, I'll tell you the key reason why it wasn't accepted, at least in the lower portion, but I think that this was echoed throughout, was concern about recreation and overuse.
Oh.
And part of what was being proposed were, access areas, buildings that would be facilities that were associated with keeping this up, and there was even the admission by the government that they were going to have to acquire land in order to make this really into a park. And it was over 50,000 acres that they had identified that were going to be in this this proposed.
So what does the Gateway Commission do now?
Oh boy. Well, I'll tell you the history, and let me tell you a little of the history, because it'll tell you what we do now. So
right.
The history was that the proposal that was eventually rejected, but it wasn't completely rejected in the lower portion of the Connecticut River, in the estuary, which is the area that has its title, and
right.
it interacts with Long Island Sound. So it's an amazing reason that it's important, at least biologically it's important, but also because of the people who have lived here and because of the association with the history of this lower area. So
right.
After the entire area was rejected for this recreation area, the folks in the lower 8 towns, which is basically the Haddam, South to Lyme, and Old Lyme,
right.
all those towns on the east and west side of the river, discovered that this had brought them together. And that was the first time that, even though those towns are defined by the river, they would all agree that the river is part of what made their communities vital and important.
Right.
And that this was the first time that those 8 towns had come together. We are in Connecticut, 169 towns,
right.
and we have, volunteer land use commissions. So it was unusual for towns to come together and say, geez, this really actually is a really important place, and maybe we should work together to not do so much of the recreation emphasis, because they felt at that time, even in the 60s, that there was plenty of recreation.
Right.
But that, it's biologically important, it's scientifically important, it's historically important, and it's scenically very important.
Yes.
So that was the root of the next iteration of the Gateway Commission. So a
Okay.
group got together and
Now, what about building and constructing things on the shoreline? Are we involved in that?
yes, and I'm going to back up a little bit more to the history
Okay.
to get to that point because
I thought you were done, I'm sorry.
No. Part of it'll get to the building part of it.
Okay.
Part of what is unique, I should say, about the Gateway Commission is that this was the first time that 8 towns got together and decided that they would work collaboratively through their land use commissions to determine how to address some key issues in the lower portion of the Connecticut River.
Right.
So that had never been done before. There were 2 representatives, a regular representative to the commission and then an alternate. So for those 8 towns, then there were the 2 what were then regional planning agencies, the northern and the southern. So there were representatives. I'm a representative to the southern, the River Cog, basically the Council of Governments. It's
Right.
changed a little bit. And then there's also, importantly, all of those people as representatives are volunteers. The only one that's not volunteer is the person who is appointed by the governor through the Department of Environmental Protection, of Energy and Environmental Protection. It's changed since then, to represent the state. And that was unusual because, home rule, the state wasn't always looked at favorably in terms
Right.
of what can happen. And we're very much about local rule, particularly in the lower portion of the Connecticut River. So it was a quasi-governmental and very local pact that was put together that has never been done since.
Right.
And it could have imploded, and it didn't. And that's pretty remarkable because what it does is enable the commission to work with the local land use commissions in all those 8 towns to define various elements of how development will occur.
Oh,
And also how to protect natural resources. I mean, there are a number of things. It's basically looking at the natural and traditional riverway scene. That's really what the commission works on. But part of the importance of it is that the Gateway Commission will work with those 8 towns, with their land use commissions, to adopt language that will be adopted by all of the 8 towns.
oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's unique. And
Yeah.
that basically,
That's very unique.
yeah, and the area that we're talking about is called the conservation zone. The original proposal was very heavy on recreation. What came as the second iteration that ultimately was successful, that Connecticut did, was to look at, again, the historic, the scenic, biological.
Right.
So that took on a different tone. It was less about recreation because the towns felt that, it's going to be recreation anyway, that people love this area and
Right.
people are going to do it. We don't need to encourage that. What we do need to encourage is keeping some of the things that, in the 60s, and as you mentioned, starting with Earth Day,
Right.
made it so important is that this place is incredible and the communities recognize that, and that there's kind of a delicate balance between how you develop an area and how you protect it for its natural resources.
Let's talk for a minute about the estuary. As a bird watcher, I recognize that it's a very popular spot among bird species and, clearly should be protected. Does your work involve, I guess, protecting the shoreline? The river coast, I guess you call it?
Yes, the conservation zone, which is
Oh.
an area of about 21,000 acres, is defined, it includes the entire river itself, the shoreline, up to the highest elevation in all of those towns.
Oh, wow.
So it is defined as the place where the Gateway Commission works. So technically, we have responsibility over, particularly when it comes to visual.
Yeah.
That's a pretty tricky thing because now we're looking at, from the water, what can you see? And one thing that you'll notice if you were to look at the view shed from the water back in the 70s,
Yeah.
and now look in the 2023, you would see a pretty dramatic shift in visibility in terms of the natural riverway scene.
Right.
We're getting a lot of houses, getting a lot of big houses, we're getting a lot of large openings for those houses. So part of the regulations that the Commission has worked on, particularly recently, have been the adoption of protection of riparian buffers. And that's just along the river edge. There's basically a 100-foot setback. In the case of Old Saybrook, it's a 100-foot setback, 'cause the town adopted that.
Now, the setback, would that be what a riparian buffer is?
Well, a riparian buffer is really just vegetation along the shore, so it's a transition area between the river itself and the upland. And it's important biologically because, well, it helps keep soil from eroding, it helps
Right.
keep water clean that comes, if you just put a lawn or you just open dirt to the river, anything that's happening in terms of land use can go right into the river. And that's a huge issue in terms of water quality, not only to the river but to Long Island Sound.
So, Judy, you sent me some pictures as examples of kind of what the Gateway Commission does or is involved with. Can we look at those pictures now?
Sure.
Can we bring those pictures up, please? Here we go. So this looks like the railroad bridge down by Old Saybrook and Old Lyme.
It's interesting because part of looking at threats to the lower portion of the Connecticut River is looking at infrastructure and
Right.
looking at what as time goes on and our technologies change and our land use pressure of more people particularly along the shoreline, we start looking at infrastructure like railroad.
Yeah.
And this railroad has been under fire for becoming more efficient because of the difficulties of both boat traffic and this very important corridor that transfers people from Washington, D.C. up to the
I
Boston.
I believe this bridge is going to be changed or modified or updated somehow.
That's the proposal, yes.
I don't know how they're going to do that, but
But it's a good example of how they do that and how that impacts the tidal marshes.
Yeah.
Is very important.
Yeah.
And that takes the vigilance of not only residents and people who live in the estuary region, but the Gateway Commission will be looking carefully at that as
let's
well.
look at the next picture. Okay, so what is this that we're looking at?
This is a large house on the Connecticut River, and this is kind of my poster child for looking at a couple of things. One is, there are several things going on here. Access to the river is huge. Obviously, if you
Yes.
have the resources to buy a large house right on the river, you're going to want access to the
Right.
river. And part of what, in trying to protect the traditional riverway scene, part of that is, if you look back in time what the riverway scene looked like, this bank would have had large trees
Yeah.
that shaded the river. And that's not only important visually, because it would have screened that house a little bit,
Right.
but it also, biologically, it's extremely important for migratory fish, for birds that are migrating, for keeping the soil in place, for cooling the water along the edges. There's so many reasons why trees should not have been cut down here, and they were. And that's
Right.
part of looking at, okay, where's the balance here? How did that happen? How do we prevent that from happening?
I guess there must be a balance between, advising somebody what they should do and what they really want to do. And that's probably an ongoing struggle.
Yes, and I think that's why the Gateway Commission is really very intent on working both educationally with residents, new people coming in, people who decide that they want to have access where they didn't before.
Right.
We would look at a structure like this and say that's a whole lot of not only the clearing of the vegetation, but
Right.
each one of those stops, which I assume were necessary in order to actually work with that steep a slope, but that can become also a place where there's a lot of furniture, there's a lot of bright umbrellas, those are the sorts of things that, in the hope to try to preserve the beauty of the river,
Right.
that we don't allow this to happen with great relish.
Let's look at the next picture. Oh, here's the team.
Here's the team. This is part of the team. This is fairly recently. This is on Hyde Creek. You can see the hillsides of Old Lyme across the river there, and the commission takes its responsibility very seriously if a proposal comes up and the within the regulatory area, and in the case of Old Saybrook, it's 100 feet. In this case, the house that was being proposed or is being proposed is in that setback.
Oh.
And so the issue was, let's get representative, and it wasn't just the Old Saybrook representatives, but it was anyone who on the commission who wanted to come to take a look at the plans, to see
Right.
what the builder and the owner had in mind, and to see how we could work together to make sure that as much protection as possible.
All right. Next
be
picture, please.
put.
Here's a nice,
Well, this gets into
Nature shot?
Yes, this gets into why is the estuary so important. And if you look at, the lower portion of this big tidal river where it reaches Long Island Sound, there are no port cities. If you look at, to the west of here, to the east of here,
Right.
you'll see big cities, either New Haven or New London, and that did not happen on the Connecticut River, and that was in part because of those shifting sandbars that made it not a very conducive place to
blessed sand.
blessed, that is so true. But also, we have really beautiful, intact tidal wetlands, and that includes salt marsh and then brackish, where it's a mix of salt and
Yep.
fresh, and then fresh, but it's all tidal. And that is unique because here in southern New England, in all of New England, this has not been built out. So we still have really good examples of these marshes that are essential for migratory and resident birds in particular, but also fish, also mammals, also
everything
humans.
living in the estuary.
Yeah.
So let's talk about historic threats, water pollution, development.
Water pollution, back at the time when, even when the original proposal for the recreation area started, the water quality of the Connecticut River was very poor. And in fact, Katharine Hepburn, one of our famous residents, put out a quote that said she was the origin of the quote that had to do with like the best landscape cesspool.
Yes.
Which
I believe that's on your website as well.
Yes, yeah. So the reference was that water quality was very poor, and that had a lot to do with a lot of septic and sewage coming down the river.
Can we say that the Gateway Commission is trying to prevent the slippery slope to production or housing and just giant buildings and stuff? Trying to protect the estuary.
That's a really, yes, but prevent is a tough word there, because we don't have the power to prevent. We have the power only to strengthen the ability to manage that. So through the riparian buffers, so through the vegetation that buffers those houses. But now we're starting to see very large houses, many thousand square foot houses up on the hillsides, and they're cutting down all the trees. We can't tell them they can't cut down the trees because it's outside of the setback. But we can meet with them and ask them and explain to them that this is a very important river, and that the very view that these people want is being destroyed by the likes of many of these houses showing up.
How do those conversations go with the landowner?
If we get them soon enough, if we understand that the land has changed hands or that there's a new development that's going in, and we can meet with them, people are people, and the commission members, again, we're all volunteers, so we meet with them to say, here's why we exist. Part of what we also are asking is to protect lighting, to have the lighting be so that we're not polluting with light.
Right.
So that's another important consideration.
Yeah, that is a recent development, I would say.
Yes, those are brand new in terms of the regs.
For migratory birds and such. Yeah, God bless you. I think that's great. Now, what do you need from the public? I mean, I would say, I think it's safe to say that a majority of the public doesn't know about the Gateway Commission, and that's part of the reason why I wanted you on the show tonight. What would you say, what do you need from the public?
Well, I tell you that often, unfortunately, the only time that people learn about the Gateway Commission is if suddenly they want to expand their house, or because we look at setbacks, we
Right.
look at how much of the lot is being occupied by the building, we look at vegetation, cutting, those kinds of things. So often they will only come to us when we're regulating them or otherwise talking to them about what we would prefer to have them do as opposed to what they may have planned to do.
Right.
What we'd really like is for people to understand that there's a lot of history behind 50 years. We're celebrating 50 years this year of
Right.
a lot of people over time working very hard to preserve, to the extent possible, the visual, ecological, scenic, and historic. Historic, we haven't even talked about that, but also just that historic riverway scene that is part of what makes these communities in the lower river so important for tourism, so important for people wanting to live here.
Right. So now, you mentioned the 50th anniversary coming up.
Yep.
I understand you have a celebration of some sort
We do, tomorrow
in
night.
August. Could you tell us about
Well,
that?
we have a number of celebrations. We're going to, but Thursday night we are going to be accepting an award of excellence from the Connecticut Land Conservation Coalition
Right.
at Gillette's Castle, and that's very exciting because the Commission has spent over $2 million, or worked with others to spend over $2 million to protect land over 1,000 acres, about 1,100 acres of
Wow.
land in the river, and we fully intend to continue to protect resources.
That's vitally important.
Very important.
Yeah.
And we're lucky to have really strong, land conservation coalition, but also land trusts and towns, communities. People are very interested in protecting the beauty of the river.
It's nice. I understand that the celebration in August is that going to be at the Roger Torrey Peterson Estuary Center, part of the Connecticut Audubon.
Right.
I think it's very nice that they let you have that celebration there.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm sure it's of interest to them, too, because we work in close circles in terms
Right.
of protection of resources.
So do you find that you go to the Connecticut Audubon and other commissions in your work?
Well, I mostly, because I'm a resident in Saybrook, I go to a lot of if they're local, I will go to them. The picture, for example, was in Saybrook.
Right.
It's a lot of work being on the commission because there's a lot of things that we're trying to do. I'm working on riparian buffers to help people understand more about what are they? What is this word riparian?
Right,
Why are plants so important to a river?
I actually had to look it up.
Yes, well, there you go. That's part of the
Yeah,
challenge of it.
yeah.
But they're so important. Part of what's great about keeping vegetation is that it's a whole lot easier to protect water resources than it is to go back and try to fix it after the water has been destroyed or have.
I want to compliment you and the Gateway Commission on your website.
Great.
It's very informative, and you can get a lot of information from the website.
Excellent. Well, I tell you, the chair of our communications, Greg Futomo, who's a resident of the town of Old Lyme, worked very hard, and there was a group of us that worked with him to get that, and we used a consultant to help get it off there. It's not perfect yet. There are definitely some glitches in it, but it's a lot of work and a lot of information, and it's worlds better than it was.
I would tell you that even I'm not very computer savvy. I haven't had a job where I needed to work with the computer probably in 20 years.
Yeah, things have changed a little.
But I detected no glitches. I just
good.
I just saw a
it's
wonderful
more
website.
where more information could be, I look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, you can always jam more
Yeah.
in there,
Yeah.
into the website.
But yes, we're very proud of that, and when you ask, what the public can do, go to our website. It's ctgatewaycommission.org,
.org, yep.
and it's, as you mentioned, I'm so glad you like it because we're trying to put lots of information and resources, educational materials, and we're going to continue. in
Yeah,
that
please do.
vein.
So I would just like to say that I think it's interesting that you have Katharine Hepburn's quote on the front when you first open the website about
Yes.
the very beautiful cesspool. And I think you're right in that since that quote was made, there's been a lot of progress. And
When you think of how clean the water is now relative to what it was
right,
50
and I
years ago.
remember being in the Youth Conservation Corps many years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a great program, and I remember the quality of the river at that time.
Yeah.
We're talking late 70s, was just, not great.
Right.
And if I remember, right now it might be a Class B river.
I think you're right.
I don't think it'll ever be a Class A, which is crystal
Well, I
clear
don't know.
water, and
I don't know.
well, it's just a murky river to begin with, I think. But I think that's normal, though.
Well, I think some of it is that Connecticut has done a really great job of working on its combined sewer overflow, and
Yep.
and now we need to move up the watershed. But never before has the conservation community done such a good job talking and working together outside of state boundaries. I mean, you think about it, all the boundaries, municipal and otherwise, that have to be engaged in order to have a conversation about protecting a river that goes through how many states and up even into Quebec, Canada.
Yeah,
So
I think it's
a lot of work.
5 or something.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4 states. Well, I want to thank you for coming on to the A Slice of Life to talk about the Gateway Commission. And
My pleasure.
I would encourage people, I would encourage the audience to go to your website and learn about what you're doing and learn about the value of what you're doing.
And if you live in any of those 8 towns, you have a representative. So you
Yeah,
can find out
yeah,
who your
right.
representative is, and if you have questions or you wanted to come to a meeting or
I see the representative from Old Saybrook and the alternate on a regular basis, and they are deeply committed to their
Deeply
work.
committed.
And it's actually inspirational.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it is. I work hard, everybody works hard, and there are times when it's just exhausting, and then you think, you know what, we are doing great stuff.
Gotta hang in
It's-
there.
Yeah, and it's,
all right, well, so once again, thank you for coming on.
thank you for having me.
And your work is very important, and I hope you and the Gateway Commission continue to do your work to help the river be as beautiful as it can be.
That's the hope.
That's it for now. Thank you for tuning in. Good night.